as a competent mayor nationwide. At a time more and more Democratic mayors have come under fire for corruption and crime in their cities, a lot of Democrats nationwide pointed to Kasim Reed. He was given prominent speaking roles in the Democratic Party as be like this guy. Well, it turns out he's corrupt as hell. The FBI has been investigating the city hall in Atlanta during Keisha Crimeway Bottom's tenure, not because of stuff she did, but because of stuff her predecessor, Kasim Reed, did. There's a moral of the story here that's relevant for all of us nationwide. Many, many times the political parties put at the forefront people they think stand out or in some way segment themselves and makes themselves good. And it actually turns out that they're flawed individuals. And people in their local community realize it. Take Stacey Abrams. At the national level, Democrats in the media have heralded Stacey Abrams' campaign. They've allowed Stacey Abrams to get away with her nonsense that the election was stolen and voters were suppressed, uncritically, I might add. The reality is that Abrams served as a state legislator in Georgia, voted for many of the policies she subsequently condemned, including cutting early voting time, and it falls on deaf ears in the national press. Keisha Crimeway Bottoms was considered for a cabinet position and an ambassadorial position in the Biden administration, even after they vetted her to be vice president. Yes, they vetted her to be vice president. And anyone who knew anything about the city of Atlanta at the time knew that was not a good compatible fit as crime started going up in the city. But the media loves to make darlings of these local officials no one's ever heard of. Take the Castro brothers, Joaquin and Julian Castro from San Antonio, Texas. Their mother's a rabid anti-American socialist who wants to rejoin the Southwest to Mexico, or at least wanted to in a past life when she was an activist. The Castro brothers have been posers for Latino politics for years with very little traction, and yet the Democratic Party built them up into national darlings of La Raza and Latino politics in this country, and they've been otherwise thoroughly rejected by the people of Texas. But nationally, you would think they were some big deal. Or, I mean, Beto O'Rourke, for God's sakes. Beto O'Rourke is the Irishman from Texas who got to power by beating an actual Latino, and the media turned a blind eye to it. And they made him some sort of big darling on the national stage, only to realize he's an egomaniac who drops the F-bomb too much, and his daddy got him out of a hit-and-run DUI when he was a kid. He's a spoiled child of privilege who finally has cratered on the national stage, but yet can't stay out of politics, is now thinking of running for governor in Texas. And the media puts you, and notice it's always Democrats. It's always Democrats they do this to. You should be skeptical when the media takes a local politician you've never heard of and suddenly turns them into a big thing. Kasim Reed is just the latest, and now it looks like a grand jury is looking into him.
I really do like his opinion on it.
So much news happening. If you're just tuning in, Bill Cosby's conviction has been thrown out by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And thus far, it looks like, by all the news reports, he will not be able to be retried. He served 3 of a 10-year prison sentence. I'm going to go back to the phones. I am going to go to Forest Park, Georgia, and Aaron's been holding patiently. Welcome. Well, maybe not. All right. I'm trying, folks. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I've got to talk about the New York City election. Now, there are a lot of nerds out there. The nerds love ranked choice voting. The nerds love complications. The people who like ranked choice voting, they're the people who wear the belts that have all the utility belts that have all the electronic gadgets and gizmos and gears, and they think they're Batman. Those sorts of nerds, they love ranked choice voting. The libertarians especially love ranked choice voting. They can't ever win, and so they're like, if only we had ranked choice voting. That's the ticket. Let's make elections more complex and we'll win. Ranked choice voting is where you have a list of candidates and you've got to rank them according to your preference. So in a primary especially, you've got 5 candidates running for office and you rank them, your first pick, second pick, third pick, fourth pick, fifth pick, or however you rank them, however the law allows. In New York, you get 5. So there may be 50 candidates running and you put the top 5 candidates you want in. What happens is when the candidate who gets the least amount of votes in the first round drops out, then you take all of their votes for who do they want second and you add it to that person and see where that person goes. And you keep going and going and going and going 5 rounds of this, redistributing votes until you have a winner. It is a remarkably complex system. It may potentially run afoul of some federal voting laws, by the way. And the New York City elections have turned into a disaster. Now, I have a fundamental criticism with ranked choice voting. And it is fundamental. And I realize the nerds say, some places get it right. Australia. Yes, we should adopt the Australian law. The same people who say we should adopt ranked choice voting from Australia are the ones who say we should adopt Australia's gun control laws as well. No. My problem with ranked choice voting is that it adds a confusion and new element to a voting system that is already in doubt in this country. We already have people left and right who are concerned about the integrity of the voting process, and you want to add an additional layer of complexity to a process that we've made already too complex. That is absurd. The conspiracy theorists will have a field day as they're doing in New York, and it turns out the conspiracy theory in New York is not quite wrong. So what happened is Eric Adams, who's running for mayor in New York City, was ahead. He's the presumed winner, but it could take 5 weeks to figure it out. They added new results yesterday, and suddenly Carolyn Garcia shoots up to not just second place, but within 2 points of him. But then people realize there are 130,000 votes that shouldn't be there. What's going on? Turns out the Board of Elections had run some test votes through 130,000 worth and had forgotten to clear them out of the machine, or so they say. New York City's elections are awful. And the American media that poo-poos elections across the country never really wants to cover New York City's elections. And New York City's elections it took them weeks to figure out who won the New York City presidential race. Everyone knew Biden beat Trump there, but by how much it took them weeks to figure out. Now they have introduced ranked choice voting, which further complicates it. The New York Times actually has their editorial out today condemning the process. New Yorkers have endured the incompetence of the city's Board of Elections for so long that complaints on the subject blend into the background noise of life in a megapolis, alongside gripes about overstuffed subway cars and putrid piles of sidewalk trash. This page calls the board at best a semi-functioning anachronism, and that was 50 years ago. Nary an election passes without another reminder of how much contempt the agency has for the city's vast, diverse electorate. Accidentally purged voter rolls, misaddressed absentee ballots, intolerably long lines. The catalog of dysfunction and neglect seems endless, yet somehow The board found a new way to humiliate itself and the city 1 week after 800,000 New Yorkers went to the polls to cast ballots in the most consequential mayoral primaries in a generation. Or was it 940,000 New Yorkers? Good question. For several bewildering hours on Tuesday, no one had an answer. Turns out 135,000 votes were not real votes, but part of a test run that the board had failed to clear from a computer before posting the numbers to the public. This is New York City, not Georgia, nowhere else. Democratic cities around the country tend to screw up. But hey, what happens when Republicans pass laws that tell them to get their house in order? Or
30.
else the media screams racism. That's what happened in Georgia, where the law will allow the state to intervene with his chronically problematic cities, but they all screamed racism about it then. Those cities were having the same problem New York was having.
15.
But it's racist when Republicans try to clear up the system. Democrats, they're not
10.
going to clear up the New York City system. They'll just keep complaining about it. 877-97-ERIC. 877-973-7425. I'm just curious. Where is y'all? I have so many apps on my laptop. There we go. I'm curious. It is nasty and gross outside where I am. Yeah. Scattered showers throughout the city. That tropical storm came through just north of Hilton Head, and everything is just gross. I mean, that is, by the way, that's the technical term. It's gross outside. And there's scattered showers all over the place, and it's hot and muggy and humid where I am. I mean, literally, I could rub soap all over me and run outside and get a shower just because it's so humid. I'm sure y'all don't want that visual. I apologize. Nonetheless, I could do it. The humidity is so gross right now. And up in the Northwest, those people are just having a tremendous heat wave. I will never forget, years ago, I was running a congressional campaign outside of San Francisco. And it was kind of a campaign where you knew you were going to lose, and the goal was to make it close so that the incumbent Democrat couldn't spend money elsewhere, and it worked. We got very close, but we lost. We knew we were going to lose, but we were able to keep the incumbent from spending money out of his district to help other Democrats, and that was the whole goal. It was a suicide mission, if you will, for campaigns. But nonetheless, I'll never forget, I was staying at a house in Alameda, California, and there was no air conditioning. No air conditioning in this place. I was there for a couple of weeks, living out of a house with a couple of people, and everyone was like, well, it's never hot here. It was hot. It was in the 90s. They're like, we don't have air conditioning out here because it's always cool. This is just an anomaly. Well, less and less so. It turns out air conditioning is a good thing. I was noticing on social media, what is today? So it would have been Monday. The BBC had this story of Jalalabad in Pakistan, or as Barack Obama would say, Pakistan. And it is one of two places on planet Earth where it gets so hot in an urban setting that people cannot cool themselves outside, that your ability to sweat and have sweat evaporate to cool your body doesn't work. And it was horrific, and they were talking about climate change, and they never mentioned the other place, which I found very curious. And the BBC guy just sounded like he had been like on an all-night bender, cigarettes and whiskey all night. I'm coming from Jalalabad, Pakistan, where the people cannot get cool. The guy's like, what is this? And it's like it was done on a cell phone. In any event, they made no mention of people having air conditioning there, and they tried to make it look like everyone was in very dire straits, even though they weren't necessarily dire straits. But he kept talking about this, the only other place in the world with this, but they never mentioned the other place. Where is the other place? Dubai, where I grew up. Y'all, when I grew up in Dubai, it would get into the 40s in the winter on occasion, and there was no heater. You had floor heaters in the house because it's the desert. During the summer, though, it could get over 115. It got over 115, and it's hot. It gets hot. And people are like, oh, well, it's a dry heat. No, Dubai is not a dry heat. It is literally on the Persian Gulf. In the mornings, we would wake up and we had almond trees. Have y'all ever seen almond trees? Almond trees, if you have, what is it? Is it a fiddler fig? My buddy Ryan Pernice runs my favorite restaurant, Table of Maine. He's very proud of his fiddler fig. It's got these massively broad leaves. Almond trees have leaves like that. They're these massively broad leaves, and they're big trees, and the almonds are inside this big fruit, a very hard fruit. Knocks you on your head and gives you a concussion. And we would go outside in the morning. The ocean breeze would come in, and it would be over 100 degrees and 100% humidity. It would be foggy and hot, and the water would literally just drip off the trees. There's so much humidity and condensation on these almond leaves. You could stand outside and take your shower in the morning. There's so much was coming off of these almond trees. And it's just moisture collectors. It was that bad. And it turns out this BBC documentary, oh, it's so terrible here. No one can survive. There's the only other place on the planet, and they're dire. The other place is Dubai. Everybody's got an air conditioning unit in Dubai. In fact, during the summertime, they tend to even suspend construction during the daytime when it's hot. People are not outside, even the migrant workers who are actually terribly taken care of in Dubai, terrible conditions to be a migrant worker in Dubai. They're typically from India, Pakistan, and the Philippines. They're horribly treated, but even they, during the day, typically aren't working. And you would have no idea of that listening to these nightmare scenarios that people are talking about. Now, what their big fear is, what the environmentalists don't like to talk about, is Africa. Now, everybody, do a mind game with me, please. I wasn't even going to talk about this. What was I going to talk about? Oh, I was going to talk about Ilhan Omar. We'll get to Ilhan here in a minute. Do a mind game with me, if you will. All of you. Yeah, you too. Come on, in the office. Pay attention to me. Mind game here. Imagine Africa. Just picture Africa on a map. You know what Africa looks like? Picture Africa on a map. Now, here's a problem. When you picture Africa on your standard map, Africa is not a country, it's a continent. China is the second largest country, followed by Canada. No, is Canada second? China's third. United States is fourth. China, India, Europe, and the United States could fit inside Africa. The United Kingdom could fit in Madagascar, the island off the coast. Neither China nor India nor the entire continent of Europe nor the United States is bigger than Africa. Africa is bigger than, in fact, I'm looking at a map right now. Africa is bigger than Japan, China, India, Europe, and the United States combined. Africa is very diverse, from the Mediterranean coast all the way down to the Antarctic. It is massive. And Africa does not have a lot of air conditioning. You go throughout Africa, and Africa tends to be poor countries without a lot of air conditioning. And the left, the environmentalist left, is very, 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 very deeply troubled of what happens if Africa develops, because people will be able to afford air conditioning. And they have concluded air conditioning is bad, that air conditioning heats up the world, and they do not want Africa to get rich. It is very funny to me, in a gallows humor sort of way, to see the environmentalist left that is very woke, that is very anti-colonial, takes a very paternalistic, very colonial view towards Africa, because they're scared to death that the Africans might actually grow up and mature as a continent, as nations, and get wealthy and start buying air conditioners for people and wreck the planet, so the left would think. It's like, for example, and this is going to make some people mad, DDT is the chemical by which environmentalists' nightmares are fueled. DDT in low doses is one of the most effective killers of malaria on planet Earth. But DDT in high doses is very bad. And DDT caused all sorts of problems. And what's her name? Silent Spring, Rachel, whoever, did a nightmare scenario book in the 1970s on DDT. And there are plenty of environmentalists today and free marketeers who say her claims were overstated, but it caused the global world to ban DDT everywhere. So what is the cure for poor African nations where the wokes treat them paternalistically? Mosquito nets. You got you got malaria spreading through parts of Africa, and now the left is perfectly fine doing genetic experiments on mosquitoes to try to wipe out malaria. But they don't want them to spray DDT in Africa. No. You can't have even the lowest of doses of DDT, which would be highly effective against mosquitoes. You're not allowed to spray it because it could cause environmental problems, even though we know at very low doses it doesn't. But the left is convinced it does. I forget which nation it was. I think it was South Africa. Decided to spray very low dose DDT in areas where there was a malaria outbreak. And European powers, through the European Union, called for an economic boycott. They would stop doing business with the country if they dared to spray DDT. They would rather let the Africans die of malaria than allow them to solve their malaria problem. And frankly, latently, behind the scenes, part of the issue is they don't want Africa to succeed. The left around the world is scared to death of what happens if African nations become developed nations, because they will get wealthy and they will buy air conditioners. And there are lots of people on a massive continent bigger than Europe and the United States combined. And they can't have that. They're scared of what will happen. And so the goal is to keep African countries comfortable in misery by giving them nets to sleep under at night so they don't get bit by mosquitoes. Then they can't live in bubbles during the day when mosquitoes may bite them then. Nope, can't have that. They would rather experiment genetically on mosquitoes than just let them spray DDT and be done with it. Nope, can't do that. The whole thing is perverse to me. But when you talk to rabid environmentalists around the world, one of their biggest fears is always what happens if Africa gets economically successful. Because if Africa as a continent becomes economically successful, they will wage economic havoc, or so the left thinks. It's so paternalistic. Now, towns, at least, that the wells are running dry. They are completely out of water. They do not have access to water. The snowfall has been massively reduced. The snowpack, the snow melt evaporated. It is deeply troubling long-term, the ramifications. You know, I was out in Las Vegas. I got to go. Philip, we got to go to Vegas. I need a trip to Vegas. I don't gamble. I like to go eat in Vegas. Eat and smoke cigars and just relax. I typically stay at the Palazzo and the Davidoff cigar stores right across the street. You just hang out, smoke cigars, and watch the fools walk up and down the strip. It's totally relaxing to me to watch people beclown themselves in Las Vegas. I enjoy laughing at the idiots.
Eden
Nonetheless,
Pure.
I need to go out there. But when the last time I went out there, it was in March, and Lake Mead was already, I mean, it's never going to fill back up, but it was lower than it had ever been, and it continues to decline. When you go out to Vegas, you go to Hoover Dam, you can see Lake Mead, which is the Hoover Dam holds the water back from the Colorado River, and you get this line on the mountains. It's like 100 feet tall. You can't tell from where you're standing. It's about 100 feet tall, and that's where the water has gone down so much, and it keeps going down, and the snowpack and all. It's a real problem. And climate change, yeah, it's impacting it, whether it's natural climate change or man-made climate change. It's still climate change. It is desperately impacting the West, and places are running out of water, and people are going to start fighting over resources sooner or later. Something's got to give. But the left-wing paternalism, when it comes to the environment, I don't think is the solution. You've got major Fortune 500 companies that on their own, like Apple, are going green, net zero carbon emissions and the like. We should be incentivizing the private sector to take care of the problem instead of the government. You've got lefties out there now saying we need a civilian climate corps. I don't know what the hell a civilian climate corps is, but I'm sure I don't want my taxpayer dollars funding it.
Eden Pure.
You know what your money should fund? An Eden Pure Thunderstorm air purifier. Right now, you buy one, you get one free. It's such a handy device. These things, you can hold them in your hand and they pack a wall up, and they're filterless. You do not have to keep spending money on filters. You just wipe it every once in a while, the filter out. It works great. It eliminates odors. It eliminates black mold and pollen and mildew. It takes care of the odors in your house. Here's what you do. Go to EdenPureDeals.com today. You'll see my name. There's a little green badge at EdenPureDeals.com. Click on my name. And when you go in to get the Eden Pure Thunderstorm, you'll see 2 is automatically selected. It's like $200 some odd. You're like, what? I don't want to spend that on 2 air purifiers. Well, you click the button, put it in your cart, and you click the checkout button. And when you go to checkout, you'll see a box that says discount code. And you put in Erick BOGO, Erick, B-O-G-O, E-R-I-C-K, B-O-G-O. That's Erick, buy one, get one. Erick BOGO. You'll get free shipping, and you'll get one of them for free. And you'll see when you click that code in, suddenly the price drops. And you can get 2 air purifiers, Eden Pure Thunderstorms, for the price of 1. It's a great deal. It's a great product. EdenPureDeals.com. Use Erick BOGO at checkout. You can thank me later.
I really do like his
2
opinion on
minutes.
things.
It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. All right. I lost my place talking about the environmentalists. I know what I wanted to talk about. Well, we got to deal with Ilhan Omar, which is a deeply problematic issue. And this comes on the heels of the Paul Gosar situation. Gosar is a Republican from Arizona, and he's been flirting with a guy named Nick Fuentes. I use flirting loosely. Fuentes is a genuine anti-Semite. He's the guy, he has engaged in Holocaust denial. He said all sorts of pretty awful things in the past about Jews and the Holocaust. And Gosar was going to do a fundraiser with him. And he first came out when people called him out on it and said, I don't know what the problem is. I don't necessarily agree with everybody on every issue. Well, the problem is that you're with a guy who's made jokes about the Holocaust and all sorts of other terrible stuff. And you haven't gotten a clue that maybe you shouldn't engage with this guy. Then Gosar came out later and disavowed it and said, no, I was never going to do this, et cetera, et cetera. He's got some issues there. Well, Ilhan Omar has stepped in it as well. The member of Congress is out saying that, well, she doesn't have any regrets. Now, you remember she apologized for comparing the United States to terrorist regimes, but now she's
on the subject of the Middle East, you upset, as you know, many of your fellow House Democrats after comments you made earlier this month about the U.S. and Israel. You were questioning Secretary of State Blinken about where victims of war crimes could get justice. You made comments to him, and also you tweeted, quote, "We must have the same level of accountability and justice for all victims of crimes against humanity. We have seen unthinkable atrocities committed by the U.S., Hamas, Israel, Afghanistan, and the Taliban," unquote. Ultimately, Democratic leaders said that equating the U.S. and Israel with Hamas and the terror and the Taliban, quote, foments prejudice. And as you know, a group of Jewish House Democrats wrote a letter to President Biden saying that accusing Israel of acts of terror, as you and other members of the squad have done, is anti-Semitic. Do you regret these comments?
I don't.
I don't regret them. She also said this.
In 2019, you said lawmakers support Israel because it's, quote, all about the Benjamins, which implies that politicians only support Israel because of money. There was a tweet from 2012 when you said Israel had hypnotized the world. Do you understand why some of your fellow House Democrats, especially Jews, find that language anti-Semitic?
I have welcomed any time, my colleagues have asked to have a conversation, to learn from them, for them to learn from me. I think it's really important for these members to realize that they haven't been partners in injustice. They haven't been, equally engaging in seeking justice around the world. And I think, I will continue to do that. It is important for me as someone who knows what it feels like to experience injustice in ways that many of my colleagues don't, to be a voice in finding accountability, asking for mechanisms for justice for those who are maligned, oppressed, and who have had injustice done to them.
In other words, she doesn't think these Jewish House members are partners in justice, that they're not committed to this. By the way, Nancy Pelosi likes this lady. Nancy Pelosi's been covering for her. Kevin McCarthy isn't covering for Paul Gosar. Nancy Pelosi's been covering for Ilhan Omar. It seems to me that maybe Gosar and Omar both should be repudiated by House leaders of both parties for flirting with anti-Semitism, openly so. But the Democrats, they like to protect Ilhan Omar, don't they? And the media loves to attack Republicans while ignoring this. Kudos to Jake Tapper,
15.
by the way, for calling her out on this stuff. Good for him. When we come back, major decisions coming from the Supreme Court. You need to get up to speed on these. everybody. Welcome. It's Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-973-7425. I am glad you're with me. I hope it's better where you are. It's just like, it looks like it's going to rain, but it's not going to rain. And it's just really cloudy, muggy. You know what, though? I hope there's a little rain that cools stuff off. Because you know what I'm doing tonight? It's bourbon, cigars, and hockey night. Yes, it is. I am watching the Stanley Cup. No, I have no vested interest in hockey at all, except this year I kind of care because I've been watching it. Phillips made me watch it, and now I kind of care about whether or not Tampa Bay Lightning can pull it off a second time. I didn't even know they had a hockey team until this year. All the things we care about. You know what I've had to stop caring about? This pains me to say. And listen, a couple of you are going to send me text messages, and because I'm about to hurt your feelings, and I'm sorry. It's not y'all. You know I love you. It's just your team. The Braves just continue to disappoint me every once in a while. They break my heart. This is why I'm not a sports fan. I mean, I grew up in Louisiana. For years, we had the Saints, and they were terrible. And then they got good. And now Drew Brees is retiring. And then the Braves, they find new ways to crush my soul. It's why, I've been a Cubs fan. I'm not a huge baseball. I'd love to go to the games. I know the owners of the Cubs, and they're a terrific family, and I love that I know the owners of the team that I grew up rooting for. When I was a kid in Dubai, one of my best friends was from Chicago, and so I was in Dubai, and I'm from Louisiana, and so I rooted for the Saints. I'm never going to root for the Bears, but I rooted for the Cubs, and I rooted for the Bulls, and the Cubs have always been, you just knew every year was going to be the year, and it actually wasn't. And you knew going in, resigned to the fact that if you were a Cubs fan, you actually weren't going to go to the World Series. And then we did. And now every year it's like being a Braves fan. My two teams, the Cubs and the Braves. And when they play each other, I mean, my general rule of thumb is I root for the team wherein they play. So if they play in Chicago, you root for Chicago. If they play in Atlanta, you root for Atlanta. In August, first weekend in August, my dad is in his 80s. My brothers-in-law and my cousin, they're going to come over. We're going to go to a Braves game. They're playing the Washington Nationals, and I'm going to take my dad. I've taken him to a Cubs game, which was cool because, I know the owner, so I can get him right down at the dugout. It was awesome. But I don't know anybody who works for the Braves, so I had to buy my tickets. And we've got good seats, but I'm going to take them to a Braves game against the Washington Nationals, which is my third favorite team only because so many of my friends live in Washington. I feel like I should root for them, although I kind of hate rooting for the nation's capital in anything. I'm sure you cared. What you should care about is the United States Supreme Court. They have two big cases tomorrow. Now, you should know that yesterday the Supreme Court agreed to leave in place the CDC rent moratorium. This is becoming a big issue. A lot of landlords are having people who at this point, they've got their money back, they've got their pay, they've got their jobs, but they're refusing to pay rent because there's a rent moratorium. You can't evict people right now. The CDC has put it in place. And the Supreme Court yesterday in a 5-4 decision ruled that the CDC moratorium could stay in place. Ironically, interestingly, maybe not ironic, but interesting, Brett Kavanaugh was in the majority and wrote a concurring opinion that said he's concluded that the CDC is exceeding its statutory bounds for continuing this thing, and that he would have tossed it, except it's already set to expire at the end of July, and he doesn't think there's enough time to relitigate and set some boundaries in place. So he's willing to let it expire, but essentially said if the CDC dares try to renew it, he's going to throw it out. There will be a 5-4 majority, maybe 6-3 majority to get rid of it altogether if that happens. So you got 5 members of the Supreme Court saying what the CDC is doing with the rent moratorium exceeds the proper scope of their authority. And one of those 5 is saying, yeah, but it's going away at the end of July, so I'm going to let it go away naturally anyway. Probably not a great call by Kavanaugh admitting it's unconstitutional, but allowing it to continue. But that's what he did, and there's nothing any of us can do about it. It's not going to extend those. So if you're a renter listening to this here program and you haven't paid your rent in a while, get ready. because the bill is coming due and there are going to be some evictions. You know what is concurrently happening? Have you paid attention to property values? They're starting to go back down. They're starting, for the longest time, demand exceeded supply, and we're starting to cross the boundary where supply is again beginning to exceed demand. And how I know this is, I've mentioned before, one day I want a house in Hilton Head, and I monitor the house prices. Not that and this is totally aspirational. I hadn't hit the big times yet. One day I want one, and I monitor houses for sale in Hilton Head. And for the longest time, over the last 6 months, there were very few houses for sale, and if they were for sale, they would be snapped up within 24 to 48 hours. It was the craziest thing. I'd watch a house come up for sale. I'd say, oh, this is interesting. It's on the beach. It's in an area I'd be interested in. I just want to see. I mean, there's no way I have the money to buy one of these things, but I would click through, and suddenly the realtor.com would say, this house is already sold. Like, what the hell? And, well, it turns out the big demand for rental properties, but also big demand for vacation homes for rich people, and the housing market's just gone gangbusters. Not anymore. Now these houses are starting to wait. Like I saw one come up for sale a couple of weeks ago, and it's still for sale. There's nothing wrong with the house. It's just more and more of this is starting to happen. The market is settling back down as people come out of lockdown. Of course, the media is scaring the bejesus out of people with the whole idea we're going to go back into lockdown because of the Delta variant of the COVID virus. We're not going to in this country. I think at this point, so many people have natural immunity that we're not going to get the big wave. You know, Australia is having a massive wave of Delta variant, and the American media is beside itself. The New York Times is in hysterics. Oh my gosh, Australia is locked back down. Why aren't we locking down? 50% of Americans have the first vaccine. 6% of Australians do. That's why the virus is spreading in Australia, because they've been so locked down and so sheltered, no one felt the need to get the vaccine. And now suddenly they're scrambling to get the vaccine. 50% of Americans have had the first dose of either Pfizer or Moderna. Only 6% of Australians have. That's why it's spreading. In fact, Dr. Fauci was on with Joe Scarborough, and Joe was asking him about this.
So let me just break this down on a personal level. My son and I went to see the Red Sox play a couple of games this past weekend. It was a capacity crowd. He had some underlying symptoms, but he's been vaccinated. I've been vaccinated. Everybody around us has been vaccinated. Is it safe for us to go out and watch baseball games if we've been vaccinated without a mask?
The answer is yes, Joe. I mean, nothing is perfect, nothing 100%. There's no intervention. But when you that, you could say it's absolutely 100%. So there will be people who are vaccinated who might get infected. That's going to be a very, very low number, relatively speaking. So right now, that's the reason why the CDC recommendations have not changed, Joe. If you are fully vaccinated, you can go without a mask, indoor and outdoor. Now, there will be certain areas of the country, regions, states, cities, or what have you, where there's a high degree of dynamics of infection in that area. And that's why you're seeing some places, like Los Angeles, for example, saying the better part of valor is, even if, in fact, you are vaccinated, I want to just diminish even more this very small risk. And I think that's where the confusion is going. If you look at the broad recommendation as a whole for the country, at this point, the CDC has not changed that.
So go outside if you're vaccinated, or inside and don't wear a mask. Now, I'm sorry, I hit the microphone. I play this audio intentionally. So that hypothetically, I know of an office. And the rule is you got to wear your mask. And from what I hear, very few people are. So my governor in my state, Brian Kemp, refused to do mask mandates and stuff. And he refused to really enforce lockdown. I mean, the state shut down for a month so hospitals could build up resources, but it really didn't stay shut down. And one of the things he told me repeatedly, and that he said elsewhere, is that if you impose a rule on people and it is not applied universally and fairly and makes sense to people, it's not going to be enforced. and people aren't going to respect it. And you're going to turn a bunch of law-abiding citizens into rule breakers, and you're going to teach people through the lack of enforcement or the uneven enforcement that there's a rule for some people and a rule for other people. And we see this with the elite and how they've behaved in COVID. And in Great Britain, they're having a big problem with a lot of the ministers of the government who have imposed lockdowns have themselves broken the rule and are getting caught. And people are realizing, wait a second, why is it good for me to be locked down and not good for him? Why does he get to break the rule and not me, etc.? It becomes a problem. So the governor in Georgia didn't want to impose burdensome lockdowns or mask mandates because he thought we're going to have a bunch of people who disrespect it. It's not going to be enforced. It gives the police a lot of discretion, local government's discretion to how they enforce it, who they enforce it on. So let's just not do it. And what we're seeing at this point is people are ready to move on. And because people are ready to move on from the virus and so many people are getting vaccinated, a lot of people are just beginning to ignore the in-house rules. So you get a company and it says you got to wear your mask in the company and no one's wearing the mask in the company. Then it also becomes who gets punished and who doesn't. Does everybody get punished? If the senior managers aren't wearing the mask, why should everybody else wear the mask? And how is it fair to punish someone who's not wearing the mask when someone else who didn't wear the mask didn't get punished? And it becomes a tit for tat, and people start ratting each other out in the office in the place. At this point, you have Dr. Fauci, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Saint Anthony of Fauci, saying there's no reason to wear masks inside if you're vaccinated. I am vaccinated. There's no reason for me to wear a mask anywhere. I've stopped wearing masks. I don't even keep it in my car anymore. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm vaccinated. Dr. Fauci says I don't have to. And for the longest time, the standard has been, what does Dr. Fauci say? Dr. Fauci says I don't have to wear a mask, so I don't have to wear a mask. And if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. And by the way, if you're not vaccinated, I don't know it. Burden's on you. You're taking the risk. I'm not going to get sick if you get sick. 99% of people, literally 99%, I'm not making that number up. 99% of the people in hospitals right now with COVID are people who never got the vaccine. 1% are people who got the vaccine. That's it. 1% of the people. And we're talking a few dozen nationwide. The people who are hospitalized right now overwhelmingly didn't have the vaccine. The burden is on the people who don't want to get vaccinated. If you don't get vaccinated, I'm not going to make you get vaccinated. Just understand the risks. But Dr. Fauci is on Morning Joe this morning saying, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask anymore, inside or outside. I think it's time for the rest of the nation to realize that let's give Dr. Fauci his due on this, and let's move on from mask mandates nationwide, including on airplanes. It's the ridiculousness of going to airports these days, everybody wearing masks. It's time to get over it. Let's go back to normal.
I really do like his opinion on things.
This hour of the program is brought to you by First Liberty Building and Loan in Noonan, Georgia. Couldn't do the show without them. Thank you to them. Their website is firstlibertyga.com. If your business needs access to a loan, a big loan, 6 figures or higher, go to firstlibertyga.com. Spend 5 minutes with them. See if you're a good fit. They want to help you get to yes. firstlibertyga.com. Thank you to them for their sponsorship. Okay, the Supreme Court. I must discuss the Supreme Court. There are 2 big cases coming tomorrow from the Supreme Court. A case that is not getting a lot of attention, and the attention that it is getting is misleading attention, is the Americans for Prosperity Foundation versus Bonta. It will come out tomorrow, and the odds are Americans for Prosperity wins the case. This case is not about campaign finance. It's not about campaign donations. It's not about any of that. And if you read the bulk of the press on it, that's what you think it's about. But in fact, my buddy Casey Maddox, who works for them, points out that Americans for Prosperity Foundation is a 501c3 organization. A state law, I believe it's in California, is requiring that nonprofits reveal their donors. Now, this is problematic, and a bunch of left-wing organizations have come out in support of AFP, which is a conservative right-of-center organization, because everyone knows what's going to happen. We've seen this already happening. If you are required to release your donors, it's going to leak. The IRS has been leaking damaging stuff against conservatives. Progressive groups have gotten a hold of information from left-leaning states to target the donors of conservative groups, and conservatives are doing the same to left-leaning groups. Planned Parenthood does not want its donors released, and yet the law would require it to do so. This is about, outside of the election context, money going to nonprofits, not to spend on campaigns, but to engage in advocacy for progressive or conservative causes. In fact, let me read you this. This is the question presented before the Supreme Court. Whether the exacting scrutiny this court has long required of laws that abridge the freedom of speech and association outside the election context can be satisfied absent showing that a blanket governmental demand for the individual identities and addresses of major donors to private nonprofit organizations is narrowly tailored to an asserted law enforcement interest. The ACLU has come out on behalf of Americans for Prosperity. Planned Parenthood has. A bunch of left-leaning interest groups and right-leaning interest groups. They're all together on this case. It's actually a very fascinating case in that the states essentially want to weaponize donations. If you've got to make it publicly available, the list of donors to a conservative or a progressive organization, you know the other side is going to begin harassing those donors. We're seeing boycotts already in this country of groups. I mean, take yesterday, Toyota. It came out that Toyota is the largest donor, campaign donor, to Republicans who challenged the election after January 6th. And progressive groups today are already organizing a boycott against Toyota. So what if Toyota is giving to a pro-life group or a pro-abortion group? What do you think activists on the opposite side of the issue are going to do? That's what this is about. Let me give you the list of some of the groups that are siding with AFP. The ACLU, the NAACP, the Human Rights Campaign, PETA, Doctors Without Borders, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Council on American Islamic Relations, the China Aid Association, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the Freedom to Read Association, the National Coalition Against Censorship, and a whole bunch of other groups, including, for example, Planned Parenthood and others, are all siding with this conservative group against a progressive idea. Now, the other case is the Arizona Voting Rights Act, and a lot of people presumed that Sam Alito would be writing the opinion and it would be expansive. Most people are now thinking, given the way the opinions have come down, he may be not writing that opinion. But it's probably a conservative writing the opinion. And this case is about voting rights in Arizona. Arizona wanted to get rid of 2 things. One, Arizona wanted to get rid of ballot harvesting, which they should get rid of. Ballot harvesting is where someone shows up at your door, knocks on your door and says, "Hey, I know you've got an absentee ballot. Don't you want me to drop it off for you?" People actively showing up at your house demanding your ballot, promising to deliver it. It's a terrible thing. And Arizona bans it. The other thing Arizona bans is if you show up at a precinct and you cast a vote in that precinct and you don't vote in that precinct, your ballot is nullified. And the left says, well, does it matter for statewide races? Those should count. And Arizona said, nope, you got to go to your precinct in order to vote for voter integrity issues. My suspicion is the court sides with Arizona. It's going to be a very big deal for voting reform. Those cases come out tomorrow. We will find